Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion. By Emile Coué. 1922. This audiobook is brought to you by the Project Wisdom. Education as it ought to be. It may seem paradoxical, but, nevertheless, the education of a child ought to begin before its birth. In sober truth, if a woman, a few weeks after conception, makes a mental picture of the sex of the child she is going to bring forth into the world, of the physical and moral qualities with which she desires to see it endowed, and if she will continue during the time of gestation to impress on herself the same mental image, the child will have the sex and qualities desired. Spartan women only brought forth robust children, who grew to be redoubtable warriors, because their strongest desire was to give such heroes to their country, whilst, at Athens, mothers had intellectual children whose mental qualities were 100-fold greater than their physical attributes. The child thus engendered will be apt to accept readily good suggestions, which may be made to him, and to transform them into autosuggestion, which later, will influence the course of his life. For you must know that all our words, all our acts, are only the result of autosuggestions caused, for the most part, by the suggestion of example or speech. How then should parents, and those entrusted with the education of children, avoid provoking bad autosuggestions, and on the other hand, influence good autosuggestions? In dealing with children, always be even-tempered and speak in a gentle but firm tone. In this way they will become obedient without ever having the slightest desire to resist authority. Above all, avoid harshness and brutality, for there the risk is incurred of influencing an autosuggestion of cruelty accompanied by hate. Moreover, avoid carefully, in their presence, saying evil of anyone, as too often happens, when, without any deliberate intention, the absent nurse is picked to pieces in the drawing-room. Inevitably this fatal example will be followed, and may produce later a real catastrophe. Awaken in them a desire to know the reason of things and a love of nature, and endeavor to interest them by giving all possible explanations very clearly, in a cheerful, good-tempered tone. You must answer their questions pleasantly, instead of checking them with, "What a bother you are, do be quiet, you will learn that later." Never on any account say to a child, "You are lazy and good for nothing," because that gives birth in him to the very faults of which you accuse him. If a child is lazy and does his tasks badly, you should say to him one day, even if it is not true, "There, this time your work is much better than it generally is. Well done." The child, flattered by the unaccustomed commendation, will certainly work better the next time, and, little by little, thanks to judicious encouragement, will succeed in becoming a real worker. At all costs avoid speaking of illness before children, as it will certainly create in them bad autosuggestions. Teach them, on the contrary, that health is the normal state of man, and that sickness is an anomaly, a sort of backsliding which may be avoided by living in a temperate, regular way. Do not create defects in them by teaching them to fear this or that, cold or heat, rain or wind, etc. Man is created to endure such variations without injury, and should do so without grumbling. Do not make the child nervous by filling his mind with stories of hobgoblins and werewolves, for there is always the risk that timidity contracted in childhood will persist later. It is necessary that those who do not bring up then children themselves should choose carefully those to whom they are entrusted. To love them is not sufficient, they must have the qualities you desire your children to possess. Awaken in them the love of work and of study, making it easier by explaining things carefully and in a pleasant fashion, and by introducing in the explanation some anecdote which will make the child eager for the following lesson. Above all, impress on them that work is essential for man, and that he who does not work in some fashion or another, is a worthless, useless creature, and that all work produces in the man who engages in it a healthy and profound satisfaction, whilst idleness so longed for and desired by some, produce weariness, neurasthenia, disgust of life, and leads those who do not possess the means of satisfying the passions created by idleness, to debauchery and even to crime. Teach children to be always polite and kind to all, and particularly to those whom the chance of birth has placed in a lower class than their own, and also to respect age, and never to mock at the physical or moral defects that age often produces. Teach them to love all mankind, without distinction of caste. That one must always be ready to succor those who are in need of help, and that one must never be afraid of spending time and money for those who are in need. In short, that they must think more of others than of themselves. In so doing, an inner satisfaction is experienced that the egoist ever seeks and never finds. Develop in them self-confidence, and teach that, before embarking upon any undertaking, it should be submitted to the control of reason, thus avoiding acting impulsively, and, after having reasoned the matter out, one should form a decision by which one abides, unless, indeed, some fresh fact proves you may have been mistaken. Teach them above all that every one must set out in life with a very definite idea that he will succeed, and that, under the influence of this idea he will inevitably succeed. Not indeed, that he should quietly remain expecting events to happen, but because, impelled by this idea, he will do what is necessary to make it come true. He will know how to take advantage of opportunities, or even perhaps of the single opportunity which may present itself. It may be only a single thread or hair, whilst he who distrusts himself is a constant gignard with whom nothing succeeds, because his efforts are all directed to that end. Such a one may indeed swim in an ocean of opportunities, provided with heads of hair like Absalom himself, and he will be unable to seize a single hair, and often determines himself the causes which make him fail, whilst he, who has the idea of success in himself, often gives birth, in an unconscious fashion, to the very circumstances which produce that same success. But above all, let parents and masters preach by example. A child is extremely suggestive. Let something turn up that he wishes to do, and he does it. As soon as children can speak, make them repeat morning and evening, 20 times consecutively. Day by day, in all respects, I grow better, which will produce in them an excellent physical, moral and healthy atmosphere. If you make the following suggestion, you will help the child enormously to eliminate his faults, and to awaken in him the corresponding desirable qualities. Every night when the child is asleep, approach quietly, so as not to awaken him, to within about 3 or 4 feet from his bed. Stand there, murmuring in a low monotonous voice the thing or things you wish him to do. Finally, it is desirable that all teachers should, every morning, make suggestions to their pupils, somewhat in the following fashion. Telling them to shut their eyes, they should say, "Children, I expect you always to be polite and kind to everyone, obedient to your parents and teachers. When they give you an order, or tell you anything, you will always listen to the order given or the fact told without thinking it tiresome. You used to think it tiresome when you were reminded of anything, but now you understand very well that it is for your good that you are told things, and consequently, instead of being cross with those who speak to you, you will now be grateful to them. Moreover, you will now love your work, whatever it may be. In your lessons you will always enjoy those things you may have to learn, especially whatever you may not till now have cared for. Moreover, when the teacher is giving a lesson in class, you will now devote all your attention, solely and entirely to what he says, instead of attending to any silly things said or done by your companions, and without doing or saying anything silly yourself. Under these conditions, as you are all intelligent, for, children, you are all intelligent, you will understand easily and remember easily what you have learned. It will remain embedded in your memory, ready to be at your service, and you will be able to make use of it as soon as you need it. In the same way, when you are working at your lessons alone, or at home, when you are accomplishing a task or studying a lesson, you will fix your attention solely on the work you are doing, and you will always obtain good marks for your lessons. This is the counsel, which, if followed faithfully and truly from henceforth, will produce a race endowed with the highest physical and moral qualities. Emile Coué.